Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and today I'm going to be reviewing Undaunted Normandy, a two-player game designed by David Thompson and Trevor Benjamin. Undaunted Normandy is a deceptively simple game. It's just a two-player game where the Americans and the Germans are pitted against each other in a series of battles during World War II. The game comes with a rule book, but also with a scenario book that's going to walk you through a number of different conflicts, each of which has its own objective. Options range from this first scenario, which is relatively simple and the one that I've set up here, to far more complex ones where each side has a different objective, their decks are asymmetrical, and the board gets to look a bit more interesting. So in the very first scenario of the game, each side has a simple goal, which is to control 5 points worth of space on this setup. So Germany starts with control over a 3-point space. We'll have to move around the board to get 2 more points worth of them. The Americans can choose to either try to mop up the points around them or come over here and challenge the Germans for control. In this scenario, each side's deck starts out the same, and they have the same basic market of cards to choose from. So you're just going to have Squad A and Squad B with scouts and riflemen. And this seems really simple. Later in the game, you're going to get snipers and mortars and gunners, and the intensity just really ratchets up from scenario to scenario. But this one is worth playing because it's showing you the most essential mechanisms of the game and the ones that are actually going to help you get those wins as opposed to do cool stuff on the battlefield. So the decks are the same, so let's start with the basics of the American deck. This here is Scout B, and when you play a card for him, you can choose to do one of these 4 things with the Scout B token that's up here on the board. So Scout B can scout for 2, which would mean that he would move up to 2 spaces and of course, scout them. So in order to move other types of tokens into spaces, you have to scout them first. You can't just throw your riflemen into an unscouted space. So you need your scouts to be your forward guys who are making space for your other people to move across the board. So let's say that we do decide to scout for 2, and that we decide to move this scout 2. So this area is already scouted. It's not going to cost him anything. But we can come down 1, 2, we would put some binoculars here to mark that we've scouted the space. And because our communications have stretched out a little bit, we're unfortunately going to have to add a Fog of War card to our discard pile, which is basically a card that's useless and annoying. So for every bit of progress you make, there's a price to pay. Alternatively, we played our scout. He would have been able to attack with 1 die. He would have been able to do recon, which basically means that if I had a Fog of War card, one of those useless ones in my hand, I could use this card to get rid of that. Or I could do a conceal action, which means that I'm forcing the other player to put a Fog of War card into their deck. So you can either use your scout to get new territory, attack, or manipulate the Fog of War cards that are in the game. So after some digging, I've also found Rifleman B. Rifleman B also has some pretty key things that he can do. He can move and attack for 1 space and 1 die. Or he can take what's called the control action. However, he can only do 1 of these per card. So if I wanted to take control over a space that's worth points, I would have to move my rifleman first, and then wait for that card to come around again to actually take a control action and take control of a space on the board. So control is a much more challenging aspect in the game than you'd think, which makes it a lot harder for anybody to get to 5 points on here, including the Germans who have a head start of 3. In addition to those very basic cards, we have platoon sergeants who can bolster or command. Bolstering basically means that you're pulling more cards from your market into your deck. So let's say that I really want another Rifleman B card to come around. I could use that command to pull a Rifleman B and 1 other card of my choice from my stock. So the bolster action is how you buy cards. Command allows me to draw and play 2 more cards on a given turn, which means that if I'm looking for something specific to happen and I want to dig through my deck a bit, then this is the guy that I want to pull. We also have squad leaders, so this guy's for squad leader B, which means that he can only influence B cards. So I can bolster for 2, which means I can pull 2 cards that are B cards from my market, put them into my deck. Or I can inspire. And what that means is that if I want to do 2 things with 1 card, so let's say that I had wanted Rifleman B to both move and take control in the same turn, I could have moved him, used the inspire action with my squad leader, and then taken another action with Rifleman B to take control. So your platoon and squad leaders are the ones who let you get the most out of the basic cards that are doing the real work on the board. The last mechanical thing I want to talk about for Undaunted Normandy is how you actually get rid of other units from the board. So as you can see, I have Scouts B here, for example, or Rifleman B. I have multiple cards that control these tokens. So when you attack someone, even if you get a hit, that doesn't necessarily remove the token from the board, but it impacts the game in a lot of interesting ways. So if, for example, a German soldier managed to hit Scout B over here, that wouldn't necessarily remove the token from the board, but it would impact my game. So attacks in this game are based on a fairly simple roll a die, hit a number system. So the Scout automatically has 5 points of defense, plus 2 for the shield here. And then to shoot from all the way across the board, you would add even further modifiers to the die roll. So the odds of hitting are pretty low, although a crit is a hit, and maybe sometimes you want to risk it. But let's say that the Germans managed to hit Scout B over here. When there's a hit, the first place that you look is your hand. So if I had a Scout B card in my hand, I would have to completely remove that card from the game. Not discard it, remove it. And it would have a negative impact on my next turn. If you've either gone first so you don't have any cards in your hand, or there's just not a Scout B in here, the next place you look is your discard pile. If the discard pile also doesn't have a Scout B in it, then you go digging through your deck and take Scout B out of there. And then you, of course, reshuffle your deck because you just went through it. And then if there are no Scout B cards left anywhere in your hand, in your discard, or in your deck, then Scout B is going to come up off the board. So what makes this interesting is it makes fighting for control a lot more challenging. So a rifleman from the German side can't come over here and do a control action with a scout still in the space. So you'd have to either hope that I move my scout out of there or completely eliminate all of my Scout Bs in order to snatch this particular space and take control. At the same time, however, the fewer Scout B cards I have, the less powerful my Scout B unit's going to be, because the cards that activate him are going to come around less and less and less often. You can do a little bit about that by bolstering cards from your stock to increase your supply of Scout Bs, but there are only 3 in the entire game. And you know that at setup. So if the German player chooses to keep going after the same piece again and again, it is a way of eliminating that piece completely from the game. So one of the things I particularly like about combat in this game is that while a successful hit doesn't necessarily remove a counter from the game right away, it does impact the game in further reaching ways that will affect your strategy and what you can do on future turns. Once you've figured out how the cards work, the real challenge of the game is figuring out how to best deploy the cards in your hand that you happen to draw. So now that we know what the cards do, I'll just walk you through a quick turn. So what happens is that each side is going to draw 4 cards, but you're actually only going to use 3 in play. So what will happen is that each side is going to choose a card to play to fight for initiative, or the right to go first. So in this scenario, the Americans start with initiative, but I have to decide how much I want to fight to potentially keep it. I'm going to have to give up one of these cards in the push for initiative. So I can choose to either get rid of a more useful card that has a higher number, because the highest number on initiative is going to be the one who gets it, or I can decide to dump this Fog of War card into my discard instead. This choice also gets more interesting when you start to have too many Fog of War cards in your hand, because if you really want to get rid of one, you need to keep it in your hand with a scout in order to get rid of it. But you may also have other plans for that scout that affect your options that turn, and that's where the game starts to get really interesting. But let's just say that I'm going to dump my Fog of War card, put it face down, hide the rest of your hand, and get ready for your turn. The Germans would do the same. So let's see what they've got. So the German player happens to have much higher value cards, and they're just going to pick the one that they are planning to not make too much use of on this turn. So for example, what you might do is, since you have a squad leader for B and then a scout and a rifleman for B, you might choose to dump squad leader A, who is less immediately useful this turn. Then both players will flip their cards, and lo and behold, the Germans have the higher number. They're going to take initiative. Then they're going to deploy their cards in a manner of their choosing, and then the American side will get to go. And play will proceed like this until one of the sides meets the objective of getting control over 5 points worth of territory on this map. One of the things I particularly like about this game is that these simple cards and simple 1 actions per card lead to an entire set of fascinating decisions to make. So let's talk about that in my final thoughts. So you might have noticed at the very beginning of this video that I described Undaunted Normandy as a 2-player game, and that is absolutely correct. However, if you check the game out on Board Game Geek, even though there is no official solo variant, a lot of people in the solo community have been playing the heck out of this game. So, do I think that Undaunted Normandy works well as a solo game? Honestly, it's not for me solo, and it's not because there's anything mechanically wrong with the game, as we're going to get to momentarily. The issue is that in order to play solo, you actually have to play both sides. Most people do this by randomly determining initiative, so you might just randomly turn one card over from the hand. Some people use dice, and some people just look at both hands and play as well as they can. But most solo players will basically determine which side has initiative, and then only look at that side's hand until it's time to play the other side. So if the United States has initiative, you're not going to look at the German hand until you've played out the United States turn as well as you can. Then you're going to look at the German cards and play the German turn as well as you can. I personally do not like to play solo this way. I'll do it if I'm learning a game, but for my solo gaming evening, it's usually not going to be my first choice. However, I think that Undaunted Normandy is a great game, so I did something I normally don't do. I went and I found actual human beings to play it with me so that I could give it a full 2-player review. And I have to tell you, I am really glad I did. Because honestly, in my reviews, normally I give good points and bad ones. There's nothing wrong with Undaunted Normandy. In fact, it's a game that's doing everything right. I actually typically do not play very many 2-player games, and purged all of my 2-player games from my collection, but now that I have Undaunted Normandy, I don't know if I can give it up. It is so good. So I think my favorite thing about Undaunted Normandy, and this is a word that I try not to apply to games because I do feel like it gets a little bit cliched, but the first word that comes to mind when I think of it is elegance. Undaunted Normandy is an elegant game. It works so beautifully. Its mechanisms are just so smooth. Gameplay is very streamlined, but that doesn't mean that it's easy. All the rules are very straightforward in Undaunted Normandy, but the things that emerge from the gameplay in Undaunted Normandy are anything but simple. You're doing the very best that you can to work with what's coming up from your deck. You're battling it out against another player and you don't know what they have or what they're going to do. Things may not work out in your favor, but you're doing everything that you can to, get through every challenge on the board. There's only one choice that you can make per action per card, and there might be a million things that you want to do. So the game is so simple, and yet all the choices that emerge from it are very complicated. And that is really the sweet spot for me in a game. If I go to game night tonight and somebody asks me to play Undaunted Normandy, I'm going to say yes, and I will pretty much always say yes because the gameplay experience is just so good. One of the other things I really enjoy about Undaunted Normandy is the way that the scenarios develop throughout the game. So the first scenario is very simple. It's still interesting, but it's just the bread and butter of what you're going to need to know to play the game. Then, as you go to future scenarios, the American and German players start to have asymmetrical decks. They start to have different goals, so they're going for different things in the scenario, and things slowly ratchet up in complexity and interest level in ways that are really intuitive. So you're getting better at the game and you're playing more exciting scenarios, but everything felt really natural as you went along. And the way that things were introduced to you didn't faze you too much because it was so well done. And that's something else that I really appreciate in a game. I like it when a game unfurls itself for me and shows me more and more hidden treasures the more that I play. And Undaunted Normandy definitely does that for me. I think it's great. And then a smaller, more technical thing that I love about Undaunted Normandy, I really like the way that combat and casualties are resolved in the game. I think that it's really cool that you have a token that's basically controlled by multiple cards depending on how you stack your deck that doesn't disappear from the board until all the cards in your hand, discard, and deck are gone. I think it's interesting. You can be really frustrated while you are fighting for control over a space, and you may not be able to get control on a specific turn, but you can definitely hit somebody's unit and get a card taken out of their hand or get a card taken out of their deck that's going to give you advantages over time if you keep pushing it. I feel like thematically that works really well. It kind of represents a unit getting depleted and being able to do less and less over time. But I also like that it makes you have to really pay attention to how many times have I hit that unit? How many cards were in that person's deck at the beginning? Have I been watching them bolster cards that are like this into their deck? The level of thought this game requires from you, while still being a very simple game to play, is something that just doesn't get old for me. I really like Undaunted Normandy. Honestly, the only thing wrong with it for me is that it doesn't have a smart AI player for me to play against because I really prefer it with an opponent instead of alone. But really, if that's the biggest problem that your game has, who am I to complain? I'm a solo reviewer who actually went and found 2-player games so I could review this game because I thought it was so good. And I don't expect that to happen very often. So let's get real. This thing is a 10 out of 10. Dice Tower seal of excellence. Happy gaming.
Thanks so much for watching another Dice Tower video. If you enjoy our videos, subscribe to the channel for more fun, comprehensive board game coverage. Also, consider joining us at one of our events. Come to Dice Tower Retreat, a small, intimate gathering where gaming is king. Join us for Dice Tower Cruise, the largest board game cruise. Attend Dice Tower West in Las Vegas for gaming fun on the West Coast, or Dice Tower East in Orlando in sunny Florida. Dice Tower Conventions, the friendliest gaming conventions on Earth. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.